So that's how important this is. Yeah. So she is a Knight of Baha'u'llah, and she's pioneered to Greece with her husband. She's 89 years old and is really a true gem in our community, in the Santa Monica community. This is a topic, basically a quote that she's written for me, and this is what I'm going to repeat back to you all. So today's topic will be about a Hollywood teenager telling her story of becoming a Baha'i, marrying at age 18, then traveling the world for her faith for 80 plus years. Sheila Banani has known several people throughout our history, our Baha'i Faith history, so you'll be hearing about all the wonderful people she has met. So all her stories that she shares with us will be truly authentic and quite unique. So everyone, if you can please just give a quick round of applause for Sheila.
Thank you. Excuse me, I have a tremor, which is not because I'm anxious about talking with you, but it's my natural tremor, so don't worry.
Maybe we don't need this mic because of this. It's not working. Can you do it without the mic?
Yeah, I was not planning on having a mic, but
We'll do it without it.
I thought you needed it for recording.
Thanks. No worries.
Okay, so we don't need this either.
Yeah, I can move it. Thank you. And also thank you to Viana for bringing this wonderful mic stand. Thank you.
Well, when Tina asked me to come tonight to speak with all of you, I thought that since I have already lived a number of years and had a number of experiences, that it would be probably most interesting for you to know me from my youth. And so I'd like to sort of start out with that and perhaps skip around according to things that you might be interested in. So feel free to raise your hand and be recognized to ask your question. If I can't answer it, I'll ask one of you to answer. I was born in New York. My father was a musician, and my younger sister also born in New York. And in the 30s, as you may remember, we had a depression. And but musicians seem to always have jobs. And my dad decided that from New York, where he was actually quite sex that happened regularly. He worked in radio, my father, and in those days, you know, before television, the big bands, as they called them, were really the entertainment, and radio was the entertainment, and he worked with people whose names you probably wouldn't know, but you might recognize if you're a fan of those days. There was a radio show called George Burns and Gracie Allen, which was a funny show. And then Benny Goodman and his band and Paul Whiteman and these fellows were all working together in New York. But my dad became very interested in Walt Disney. And Disney had started a studio out here in the 30s. And my dad said, you know, let's move to Hollywood. I'm interested in working with Walt. So we came cross country, not by air, but by train, and my dad drove the car with the dog in it. We settled here in the Valley, and Walt's studio was at that time in the Valley. I was like 5 years old. My sister was like 3 years old. And we just went along, you know, with the family. We didn't really know one end of the country from the other. And we certainly didn't know the difference in my dad's musical interests But of course, it made for a perhaps unique childhood in many ways. I remember once he took me to the studio, to the commissary to have lunch, and Walt was there, and then there was some funny guy who came over to the table and started chattering away, and my dad and this fellow looked at me and expected me to have recognized this voice from this old guy. So they said to me, Sheila, who do you think that is? And my answer was, a monkey? It sounded like, it was apparently the guy who voiced Donald Duck.
Wow.
And I didn't recognize it as Donald Duck. So you can see I was not very impressed on my first exposure to Disney Studios. But of course, later, my father became head of the music department at Walt Disney's and worked on films that some of them you might know and have grown up with yourself. So that was the beginning for me in Hollywood. Now, my parents became Baha'i soon after they arrived in Hollywood. Both my mother and my father. They had originally met the faith in New York, as the manager of the apartment building in which we lived happened to be Baha'is, and invited them to a fireside. They didn't call it that. They said, come and meet some friends. And the friends turned out to be having conversations about the Baha'i Faith. And my parents, mostly my mother, became interested in the faith. When they moved to Hollywood, I say Hollywood because we actually did move over the hill. This was, of course, before the freeway, and the Coanda Pass was the way we came over the hill. We did move to Hollywood. Now, I want to jump ahead a little and out of this studio life to how it was for me in LA, in Hollywood actually. My own interest in the faith was something that didn't develop until I was a teenager. As I remember my parents taking me to a Baha'i Sunday school, they called it. And what it turned out to be was a sweet little old lady in downtown Los Angeles living in a hotel who, bless her heart, opened her apartment on Sunday mornings to, give a children's class. And my sister and I were the only children in this children's class, and we had to drive miles, it seemed to me forever, from the valley to downtown LA to go to this children's class with just my sister. I thought that was a cheat. She was very kind, but this was not something that was engaging for me. But my parents were trying, and we didn't have children's classes like you all probably teach now yourselves as children's class teachers. Or if you haven't, you probably will be one day. So that life was unknown to me as a Baha'i child. My parents also, having heard that your child or your children should be independently investigating all religions for themselves, deciding what they wanted to believe, and there was no such thing as automatically becoming a Baha'i just because your parents are Baha'is. So my parents sort of made it difficult for me to even find out what the faith was about. They said, Sheila, why don't you go with your grandmother, who was by that time living with us. My grandpa had passed away. Go with your grandmother to the Presbyterian church in Hollywood. She was a Presbyterian. And you can go to the children or youth classes there. So to accommodate my grandmother and my parents. I did that for 2 or 3 times, and I said, this is not very interesting to me. So I don't want to do that anymore. There was no alternative. There was a turning point, however. And for me, this was a significant time in my life, really. I got a hold of a copy of the Dawnbreakers. Now, for those of you who haven't read the Dawnbreakers, beware. Because if you read that book, if you have the experience that I had, I mean, I wanted to become a Bobby after I read the Dawnbreakers. Because of course it was all about the absolutely fantastically thrilling and moving and alarming faith of the early believers. And then I looked around. By this time, I was 16. And I thought, where are the Baha'is? In Los Angeles. I got an email the other day from a friend of mine who works in archives in the Los Angeles Baha'i Center. And he had come across a list of the directories of the Baha'is of Los Angeles in 1950. Okay, now, 1950, if you can cast your mind back that far, I was, 16. And the number of Baha'i adults, according to this directory, in 1950 in the city of Los Angeles, was 262 adults. You want to guess how many youth were listed?
4.
2.
4.5.
5.
You're so close.
1.5.
6. 6 under the age of 21. Okay, 6 were declared Baha'is. Now, in 1950, I declared as a Baha'i and registered as a Baha'i, and I was a youth, so I was one of those 6. I didn't remember that. I just knew there were hardly any youth. There were some people over 21, but they were all married, and for me that was no fun. So LA was just as big as it is now. That is spread out. The Los Angeles Baha'i Center was on South New Hampshire. 331 South New Hampshire was the address. It was in a big old house. That was the Baha'i Center of Los Angeles. And again, wherever we lived, it was far away from the center. So, the beginning of my Baha'i life, I was really on fire with the faith. And so this is why I suggest that if any of you haven't read Dawnbreakers, take it seriously and take the opportunity, because even though all these years later, I don't think it's lost its punch, its attractiveness, its moving stories. And of course, we have lived through several years of Baha'is in Iran who have suffered those similar circumstances as those Dawnbreakers did. And that makes it even more moving when you realize what has been happening for 179 years of the existence of the faith. Now, after I became a Baha'i and looked around and saw that there really weren't any youths, there was one older couple, not so old, they were in their 20s. So the two of them, Don was his name, Don Witzel, and his wife, Mignon Witzel. And they saw me sort of floundering in terms of, no connection. We really didn't, I would have died to have a group like you to be near me and to be part of all the things that you can do, because there are enough of you. And it's really a different life when you don't have some fellow Baha'is. So naturally, I tried to teach the faith. I was going to a high school. This was before I got married. I was going to a high school. There was a private school, Marlborough School for Girls. For 6 years I went to Marlborough, graduated from Marlborough with a senior class of 60 girls. And then I was going to enter UCLA. You notice I say was. Don and Mignon Witzel and I thought it would really be great to try to get to the youth of California. Now this was reaching, we figured there'd be more of them than there were in Los Angeles, of course, throughout the whole state of California. I don't have the statistics for how many youth were in the state of California, but it was a little more than 6, but not many more. And most of them lived in Northern California. So Don and Mignon were able to find out how to reach some of these youth, so-called youth. Now they were sort of like what we think of as youth now. It included people up into their 20s. And I was 17 at this time. So we thought, why don't we give a conference? And it was summer, it was early summer. And we thought we'd give a conference around the time of the martyrdom of the Bab. Not the most joyful subject, of course, but it was the soonest Baha'i holy day that we could hope to get, enough youth to come to Los Angeles, to the Baha'i Center, to have a conference on July 9th over that weekend. And we do things like go to Griffith Park for a picnic and have some talking about the martyrdom of the Bab. And we did this like for 2 or 3 days, and we had probably, this is calling on youth from the whole state now, we had maybe 10 people, 12 at the outside. And among them were my future husband. Little did I know. So down from Northern California came my future husband, who had just finished going to school at Stanford, and he was in this doctoral program. And as I told you, I was getting ready to go to UCLA. He didn't know that. So we had this great conference. I was so happy. I thought, this is, I wish we could do this all the time. Maybe not have a conference, but just, be together and talk about things that meant something to us. So the conference ended, and the last day of the conference, we were sitting in Griffith Park, having finished our picnics, getting ready to say goodbye. And people would split, and drive to wherever it was they lived. And I received a note passed to me, and would you like to go to dinner tonight? Now, the man who passed it to me, I thought was the person who had written the note, but they wasn't. So I said yes, because I like that man. It was cute and funny, and I thought, sure. That night, who came to the door but this fellow, but he had a girl with him, and I mean, it was not the one who passed me the note, but it was from, who later became my husband. Anyway, we went to dinner to a restaurant on the Sunset Strip. It was a Russian restaurant called Bublichki's. Just the other day, I had somebody Google it, and it doesn't, the name is retrievable, but I don't know, I haven't checked myself. I don't know how it's still Googleable, if there is such a word. But the restaurant has been, I think, still there in the form of what looks like a Swiss chalet. It's been called different things. It's been different restaurants over many, many years, since 1950. During the dinner, when I realized that my date was actually Amin, I have to take a little side note and tell you something. Now, I have a weekly Zoom class with the daughter of that girl who came with the fellow that I liked. That's another thing, once you get sucked into the faith, you never shake off the possibility that you're going to run into somebody you knew, or you knew their parent from years ago. Anyway, the conversation at the restaurant, I want to go back to that because I was totally oblivious to Amin's thoughts and interests. As I told you, I was getting ready to start UCLA in the fall. This was July. So he thought, because I had helped organize the conference, that I was apparently thought I was older than I was. So he said to me during dinner, and where did you go to school? I said, well, I'm just starting UCLA in the fall. He said, what? How old are you? 17, I said. Now, he was, at this time, 6 years older, so he was 23. Danger. I know you understand. After dinner, he had a Mercury convertible with the top down in the summer.
Well
Hey, you gotta get yourself a convertible.
He said, what shall we do after dinner? I said, well, I know a place up on Mulholland that has a beautiful view of Los Angeles. So we drove up to Mulholland. I don't know what Mulholland is like now, but I can tell you what it was like then. A lot of other people had their cars parked up there too, looking at the view, and this was before smog. It was beautiful, really beautiful. Amin started quoting Persian poetry. I couldn't understand it, but it sounded beautiful. My friend who handed me the note, and his girl sitting in the back seat. And this was a magical night for me, but I was not interested in romance or anything like that. To me, this was just, had been a wonderful conference, a wonderful weekend, a good dinner, and a beautiful night. And I went home, and then Amin's letters started to arrive. My parents, who were much smarter about these things than I was, looked a little nervous. They asked me after a few letters came, what's going on here? I said, I don't know. I really had no idea that Amin was ready in his life for making a step toward finding a girl that he wanted to marry. But that was the last thing that I had on my mind. And I seriously have spent this much time telling you about this because I feel like I have to apologize for getting married at the age of 18, which is not a good idea. I'm not recommending it. And when you think of me in years to come when I'm not here to defend myself, I hope some of you remember that I said 18 is too young to get married, to make a decision as important as that. I was just fortunate because Amin was a wonderful man. He came from a wonderful family, and I'll spend a few minutes telling you about that too. I haven't gone too long. You keeping your eye on the time?
You're good. We can all go to Mulholland after this.
Yeah, but do you have a Mercury red convertible? Yes. Amin was an extraordinary person, and we were married for 62 years. He passed away in 2013. He's buried here in Santa Monica and in the Woodlawn Cemetery, and his, I shouldn't talk about him yet. The anniversary of his passing on July 28th is coming up soon, and it's 9 years since he passed away. I think I will tell you some other things because I don't want to cry so much. But I want to tell you that I think at the time that Amin and I were married, one of the wonderful things about it was that there were very few Persians here in Los Angeles area. He had come to the States in 1944 he was born in Tehran, and he left with a group of boys, and we always refer to them as the 9 Persian boys. They grew up, became adults, got old, died, and we still refer to the group as the 9 Persian boys, and he being one of them. I think I mentioned he was 17 when he left Iran and came to the States, and it was 5 years before he had an opportunity to go back to Iran to visit his parents. So for 5 years he was here going to school, and as I mentioned, there were hardly any Persians in the United States, let alone in Los Angeles. I mean, it is so different now. And anyway, we had a wonderful marriage and had 2 daughters. Of course, they're all grown up, and 2 grandchildren, 1 grandson, 1 granddaughter, and they're all grown up. So let me go back to something about Amin's parents now. You're getting too tired. Okay. Amin's mother was like a fifth generation Baha'i. Her earliest relatives became followers of the Bab. This is my husband's mother. And Amin's father was born in Baghdad from a Jewish family. He came, Amin's father, Musa Banani, ran away from home with an older brother, left Baghdad and came to Iran. And he wanted to have, when he became a Baha'i, he wanted to have a Baha'i wife, and he chose Amin's mother, who was from an old Baha'i family, you see. And they had 5 children. Amin was the firstborn and the son. And when the guardian, Jogi Effendi, called for the Baha'is to go out and teach the faith, to go as far as they could in the world, at the beginning of our 10-year plan, what is often referred to as the World Crusade, a 10-year crusade, the 10-year plan. It's called all those things at various times. And in the most recent letters from the Universal House of Justice, again, they call all of us to recall the days of the 10-year plan. And really, this is the most important thing that I have to say to you tonight. You are the defenders of the faith and the spreaders of the faith and the ones who are carrying the faith now in this significant plan, the 9-year plan, which we have now. When we had that opportunity, first, Amin's parents, even before the 10-year plan started, left Iran. His parents left Iran and went to Africa, to East Africa, to pioneer, to open the country of Uganda to the faith. And that was the model, really, that Amin and I wanted to follow. So we left, after we married, we left California and moved to Greece to open the country of Greece, which had no Baha'is in it at that time. That was 1953 when we moved to Greece. By that time, we had a 10-month-old daughter, Susie, and she, to this day, says, "How come I'm not a Knight of Baha'u'llah?" I said, "Honey, I didn't make this choice. I didn't decide these things, and I think she should be." I told her, in my book, she is. 10 months old is very young to take a baby with you to a country you've never been to before, and a country that had been experiencing war shortly before you arrived. The bullet holes were still apparent in the buildings. Was challenging. And she had her challenges as a child, but she was a means for me to meet Greek people, because I could put her in the stroller, go to the park in Athens, and talk with other mothers with young children. And I want you to know, I met a young woman in the park in Athens, in those days, in 1950s, with a young baby girl, just the age, I think 2 months difference from my daughter Suzanne, our first daughter. And that girl, Frozo is her first name, grew up just like my daughter. And I knew that she was available someplace, and thank God for Google. I tracked her down to London. She's in London, she's teaching architecture. Who was it I was talking with? She's teaching architecture in London. I've contacted her again. We are currently in contact. She married, she had a son who's a musician. And so the cycle goes on. She knows I'm a Baha'i. Of course, I'm teaching her the faith as best I can now via email and FaceTime and any other way I can reach her. And I hope that and I've put also another thing. There is a counselor for Europe who was appointed, who has been pioneering, her family and husband have been pioneering in Greece for several years. Her name is Shirin Yusufian Ma'anian. Her parents, her husband's parents, Ma'anians, are in Greece, in Athens. And she was appointed recently as a counselor for Europe. So here is now a counselor coming from Greece to work with, and Europe is struggling again because of Ukraine. So, to me, I can't imagine life without the faith. Can you imagine how dull and boring it must be for other people? And our lives are because of the opportunities that we have to meet people and to be, inspired to do things outside of our little circles. What an interesting life I feel I've had. Now that I've reached this end of it, I'm so grateful for everything when I look back and I see that with just the biggest sense of purpose, that I could somehow fit into this pattern of what is useful, what should be one's purpose in life, what matters. When we realize there's so much that needs to be changed in the world, what gives us the courage when we see that improvement seems to be very slow coming? But that doesn't mean that we have the whole picture into the future. We're living through this process. As we live through it, what keeps our spirits up? I can tell you what keeps my spirit up. Just seeing all you guys sitting here is one thing. I think I probably talked enough.
No.
Why don't you ask me some question? If you have any question at all.
What is, I have a quick question, your relationship with like Ruya Khanum and, Shogi Effendi, was there anything there?
Oh, lots.
Like, did you know them? Did you meet them? Or was it
Well,
just
when I told you about Amin's parents, his mother and his father, when they came to Africa to pioneer, it was at a time that state of Israel was being, all these things happened within a few years of each other. State of Israel was being created in 1948, And Guardian had closed down pilgrimage to the World Center, to that area that, for those of you who may not be Baha'is, the Baha'i World Center is located because the founder of the faith passed away in this area and is buried there between Haifa and Akka, which was Syria and now is the state within the state of Israel. His parents coming from Africa to go on a pilgrimage to the Baha'i World Center in Haifa and in Akka. When they did that, Amin's father was called by Shoghi Effendi and told that Shoghi Effendi told Amin's father that he wished to appoint him in a special helpful category of something they call the hands of the cause of the faith, of helpful hands, you know. And this is an honor that Shoghi Effendi told Amin's father that he would, you know, how shall I put it? Most of the appointed individuals as hands of the cause received notification of their appointment by various means. I think maybe one other received the word actually from the Guardian himself rather than in a letter or a telegram or another means of notification. And yeah, I can't remember why I was starting with him. And
you were talking about Ruhi Khanum and Shoghi.
oh yes, thank you. That's good, Hoda. So Amin's parents went on pilgrimage when the doors of pilgrimage were opened after the state of Israel was created. And this was 1952, I think. And of course, the Guardian and his wife, Mary Maxwell was her name, but he gave her a title. Shoghi Effendi gave her a title, Ruhiya, and Ruhiyeh, and Khanum means lady, or, you know, it's an honorific title. And Baha'is refer to her by this name that Shoghi Effendi gave her. And of course, both were present at the time of Amin's parents' pilgrimage. And without going into those details following that, there were a series of conferences that Mama John and Abba John, Amin's parents, as we called them, Mama John and Abba John, were able to come to the States for the conference in 1953, which was the time of the public opening of our Baha'i House of Worship in Wilmette, Illinois. It had been slowly being built over 50 years till finally it was completed in time for public opening, and many Baha'is came to that, including Ruhiya Khanum, and on behalf of the Guardian. And so I met her at that conference in 1953 in Wilmette in Chicago area, the conference in Chicago as well. I mean, meetings in Chicago. And then, of course, we went pioneering, as I told you, going to open the country of Greece. And when we arrived, one of the things we wanted to do was to ourselves ask for pilgrimage. And pilgrimage, you know, you can't just get on a plane and go there and knock on the door and say, I'm here. You have to ask permission because you go as the guest of the guardian in that case, because he was still living, of course, till 1957. So I'm not going to tell you about my pilgrimage because that would be another night, at least, probably a few nights. But just to say that in 1955, Amin was able to go on pilgrimage from Athens to Haifa. He took a break from school. He was teaching school. And we didn't want to both leave the country that we were pioneers in. So he went first in 1955 for a 9-day pilgrimage. And then I went at Resvontheim in 1956. Guardian was 59 years old and I was 23. And just to give you an idea, for 7 out of the 9 nights that I was there was dinner with the Guardian, with Ruhi Khanum, with the Hands of the Cause who were working there on assignment. Leroy Iwas, Amelia Collins. I knew Millie Collins from California. Mason Remy. I think that's it. And there was Leroy's wife, Sylvia, and Jesse and Ethel Ravel, who were secretaries working there from living in Pennsylvania, longtime Baha'i family, Ravels. Dr. Lutfullah Hakim was there. He was a member of the appointed International Baha'i Council. The Guardian had appointed that first council. It's a lot of information. So I'll tell you another time, if I'm invited back, about pilgrimage. But I'm thinking, if there's another question, otherwise I wanted to close with I brought Amanda Gorman's book. You know, Amanda, this is called Call Us What We Carry. You know, she was the Youth Poet Laureate here in the States. She was invited by our Martin Luther King Day program in Santa Monica the year before. She gave her poetry, wonderful poetry, at the inauguration of President Biden. So we had her in Santa Monica. And when she spoke at that program that we had in Santa Monica, and mentioned that she had majored in sociology, and I had taught sociology at Santa Monica College, so after she spoke and went over to the Miramar Hotel for the involvement fair and the, you know, where we were all mingling, and I went up to her and spoke with her, and she was very sweet. So then, much to my surprise and delight, she was invited to speak in front of the whole world. And that's why I brought this, because I want to read the poem that she gave on those steps the day of the inauguration of Biden. I think it's such a good poem, and she's such a wonderful young woman, and I hope that she will continue to do all of the good things that she speaks about. She went to school here at, I think, Crossroads School. So if you'll allow me, I will close my comments and hope to come back another time. And if any of you are interested in having more conversation, I would love to hear your questions or answer, hopefully, questions. Poetry is something that I have enjoyed doing for the last few years. Could I ask you to, thank you so much. Don't let me forget it. I should have put a Post-it note in here. It's coming. The hill we climb. Mr. President and Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President and Mr. Emhoff, Americans and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending dark, in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl, descended from slaves and raised by a single mother, can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but this doesn't mean we're striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose. To compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so that we can reach our arms out to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it. Because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shadow our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith, we trust. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour. But within it, we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one were left. With every breath from our bronze-pounded chests, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the west. We will rise from the wind-swept northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked south. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and dutiful, will emerge, battered but beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the dark, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. It's a beautiful poem. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Sheila, for that wonderful story of your life. I don't think one night can do it, really. I think we need like at least a two week like intensive of our life just to get the backstory on. So friends, again, thank you all of you for coming. We have sweets outside. I believe there's also tea as well. Katya has something quickly to announce. It's regarding the open mic night that's coming up next week, so she can announce that.
Alright, if you guys haven't heard, next Saturday night, 7:30 at the Encino Baha'i Center, there's going to be an open mic night. You're invited to just come watch, or if you'd like, you can perform singing, playing